I've been following my sister for 60 years. It's always a bad idea. When I grew up, we had a picture in our house. It was a picture of Joe DiMaggio. He was throwing out the first ball at a World Series game. And it was actually a reprint from Look magazine. I can see many of you actually remember Look magazine. In this picture, it was a very iconic, immediately recognizable picture of Joe DiMaggio. The ball is just leaving his hand. You can see 10 or 12 rows into the stadium. All eyes are on Joe DiMaggio. What made it an interesting picture is there was one person in the same box as Joe, looking straight at the camera, smiling, eyes bright, oblivious to Mr. DiMaggio, but keenly aware that it was a camera and an opportunity. I gave her incessant hard time in the picture. Although, as you've seen, I have 60 different versions of the same thing. It was her smile that I remember. It was her smile that set her apart. If Look magazine had understood she was a zombie at the time, it would have been even a better photograph. I got to spend a fair amount of time with my mother in the last 6 months. One of the things I got to do was to introduce her to Google Earth. And with Google Earth, you can go down and look at neighborhoods and look at old haunts, and many of the places that Kelly mentioned. We would go onto Google Earth and look at her old neighborhoods in Scarsdale and Poughkeepsie, where she used to spend some summers, and Morningside Heights when my dad was in New York, and it was great. It was a lot of fun, and she'd walk through those and remember. But I was struck that what she really remembered from her youth and looking back on those landscapes was actually the streams and the forest and the trees. I was very surprised. I realized that her love of streams and forests and trees, open space, went back a lot further than even her engagement in the Lexington Conservation Commission, which I believe goes into the 1600s. She always had this affection, and Lexington gave her an opportunity to lead us all, to lead everyone, and push the remainder in the same direction. At our house on Smith Avenue, East Lexington, we always had bird feeders. I was raised to know the names of all the birds. I was raised to hate squirrels. I was never allowed to have a BB gun because my mother believed that the combination of 10-year-old boy and birds and a BB gun was a fundamentally bad idea. I realize now that I should have peddled that as a 10-year-old boy, a BB gun and squirrels, and I probably could have sold this idea. I was never successful. On road trips, whenever we travel around New England, my mother would point out the purple loosestrife, which always delineates wetlands in New England. It was only when I went to college that I learned that this was indeed an invasive species, and took great joy in pointing this out to my mother, that her beloved purple loosestrife was invading and killing the wetlands. She was very flexible and simply said that it simply needed management. We could work with it. It was a beautiful flower, and she was comfortable. My mother's devotion to this town and to the area here is well known. In the last few months, one of the things I really enjoyed was every week reading the Lexington Minuteman with her. I grew up with the Lexington Minuteman. It was somewhere above the New York Times and the Boston Herald as the important news items in our household. I could never accept that because their coverage of the Red Sox was really not as good. But it was an important event on Thursdays when the Minuteman came. And more recently, I would read the Minuteman to her. Her command of Lexington issues remained very strong. We'd read through all the sections, but the real heart of this was the letters to the editor, in which I was directed to read the title of the letter and then skip to the author. And then she would smile and raise her eyebrows, and you could interpret that immediately as to whether I would be approaching this letter with skepticism or with endorsement. She'd tell me often about the author, perhaps 30 or 40 years of the author's stances on local issues, their checkered history. Sometimes she didn't know the author, and there was this sort of air of vague inappropriateness of writing to the Minutemen. She had no idea who they were. But we loved to go through those letters, and then would fill me in on all the details. And I personally am quite supportive of the bed and breakfast downtown. I think I can weigh the pros and cons. If you want to meet later and talk about it, I'd be happy to. I think I've got it down. As many of you know, my mother and was quite proud that she voted against the approval of Brookhaven at Lexington when she was on that town meeting. There was no form of structure, whether it be an institution like Brookhaven, daycare, home for disabled children, that was worthy of filling in a wetland. But she was also flexible, much like Purple Loosestrife. She could work with you. She signed up immediately thereafter. My father and mother were the poster children, one of the inmates, as she would say, on the initial brochure for Brookhaven, despite their disapproval of the institution. But she knew that it just would need a little management, and she was happy to lend that hand for many years. Brookhaven has fewer non-recycled batteries as a result, and I don't believe that the fertilizer from the lawn flows into the wetlands in the manner that it would if my mother was not on patrol. I think we should also say that I think Kelly and I both, when we think back on Jerry, certainly the smile is sort of the one consistency. The other is the image of my father and that couple. They were a good team, and incongruous at times. I always loved the fact that my mother, with her high school education, was absolutely the editor, punctuator, and speller. She rewrote everything that my far more credentialed father ever wrote, and did a far better job of it. But they were very supportive of each other. She was the extrovert and then the people person. The person in front of the camera, the person smiling. She made me a better person. She made me laugh. It was a joy all these years to have Jerry. And your presence here and the number that you are, I think, is testimony that it was not her family alone who felt this way. I'll leave you from a line of Alice in Wonderland, which I think she would appreciate. When Alice first meets the Cheshire Cat. "All right," said the cat. And this time, it vanished quite slowly, beginning with the end of its tail and ending with the grin. The grin that remained for quite some time after all the rest of it had gone. Thank you.